Ethan Carter, a 42-year-old veteran, clutched his old jacket against the evening chill in the Colorado mountains, his steps slow and heavy on the sidewalk. It had been 2 years since he'd left the Army, but the war still hung over him, an invisible weight on his chest. No job, no therapy, nothing to fill the void. But tonight, he was here, outside the town animal shelter, answering his sister's plea. A dog might help, she said. Ethan didn't believe it. But then again, he didn't expect to see familiar eyes staring back at him. Take a moment to breathe, maybe enjoy a warm drink, and remember, you're not alone. Like Ethan and Charlie, we all need patience and connection. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. We're grateful to have you here. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped inside the shelter, the scent of disinfectant mixing with the sharp chill of evening air. Rows of kennels lined the narrow walkway, some occupied by dogs barking eagerly for attention, others housing silent figures with wary eyes. He scanned each cage, searching for something, though he wasn't sure what. A connection, a flicker of recognition, but nothing stirred in him. Just as disappointment crept in, a shelter worker called out, "Mr. Carter, we have a German Shepherd in the back. He's different." Ethan's pulse quickened. He followed the woman down a dimly lit corridor, past a row of empty kennels, until they stopped at a secluded cage. In the farthest corner, a large German Shepherd lay motionless, his black and tan fur dull under the flickering fluorescent light. His posture was stiff, his gaze distant, empty. Something inside Ethan twisted. His throat went dry. "Charlie?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. The dog lifted his head, eyes meeting Ethan's. No spark, no wagging tail, no recognition. Just a hollow stare, as if Ethan were a stranger. A painful lump formed in his chest, the weight of lost years pressing against him. "He doesn't trust easily," the staff member murmured. "He's been through a lot." Ethan swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists. He could walk away, pretend this wasn't happening. But as he stood there, watching the broken soul before him, he knew. He wasn't leaving without Charlie. Ethan knelt slowly, his heart pounding. He extended a trembling hand toward the cold metal bars, hoping for something, anything. But Charlie didn't move. The dog's lifeless stare cut deeper than any battlefield wound Ethan had endured. This wasn't just distance. This was loss, the kind that steals memories, buries trust, and leaves nothing but ghosts behind. He was found abandoned in another state, the shelter worker continued softly. Whoever had him, they gave up. Gave up. The words sliced through Ethan like a blade. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe. How could someone give up on him? On Charlie, the dog who had once charged into chaos without hesitation? Who had slept by his side when nightmares made the nights unbearable? Who had saved his life? Ethan forced down the grief clawing at his throat. He wouldn't be just another person who walked away. He pushed himself up, turning to the staff member with a steadiness he didn't quite feel. "I'm taking him," the woman hesitated. "Are you sure? He's not—" "I know what he is." Ethan's voice was firm, unwavering. "He's mine." The shelter worker nodded, disappearing down the hall to prepare the paperwork. Ethan turned back to Charlie, his fingers tightening around the cage bars. "I don't care how long it takes," he whispered. "I'm bringing you home." Charlie didn't respond, didn't move. But Ethan wasn't expecting a miracle. Not yet. The drive home was silent, thick with an invisible tension Ethan could almost feel pressing against his chest. Charlie lay curled in the back seat, his body stiff, his eyes locked on the window as if the world outside held some terrible secret only he understood. Ethan stole glances at him through the rearview mirror, searching for any sign, any flicker of recognition. But the dog remained distant, trapped in whatever ghosts haunted his mind. When they pulled into Ethan's driveway, he shut off the engine and turned to face Charlie. "We're home, buddy," he said softly. The words felt empty, meaningless. Charlie didn't move. Ethan sighed, stepping out and opening the back door. He crouched, extending his hand in invitation, but the German Shepherd only stared past him, his muscles rigid. Patience, Ethan reminded himself. This wasn't the same dog who once sprinted ahead of him, tail wagging, ears perked, waiting for the next command. This was a dog who had been left behind, who had learned the world was cruel. After a long pause, Charlie moved, slow, deliberate, every step cautious. He followed Ethan to the front door, but hesitated on the threshold, sniffing the air, his posture wary. Ethan didn't rush him. Instead, he stepped inside, giving Charlie space to choose. Finally, with a tentative exhale, Charlie stepped through. Ethan watched as the dog surveyed the room, his eyes flicking over the unfamiliar space. "You're safe here," Ethan murmured. But Charlie didn't seem to believe him yet. That night, Ethan left the bedroom door open, listening to the steady rhythm of Charlie's breathing from the living room. The German Shepherd hadn't touched the food or water Ethan had set out. He hadn't explored, hadn't settled, just sat near the door, staring at nothing. Ethan lay awake for hours, his mind tangled in memories. The first time he and Charlie trained together, the way the dog had pressed against his side in a firefight, unwavering. The sound of his paws thudding against desert sand as they ran toward danger, together. Now that same dog wouldn't even look at him. A lump formed in Ethan's throat. He had expected this to be hard, but he hadn't expected it to hurt like this. Just as he was drifting into uneasy sleep, the soft sound of movement stirred him. He turned his head, barely breathing. Charlie was up, his paws patting lightly across the hardwood floor. The dog stopped just outside Ethan's doorway, standing motionless in the dim light. Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. Then, after what felt like an eternity, Charlie curled up near the threshold, not inside the room, not by Ethan's side, but closer than before. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his chest easing ever so slightly. "Good night, buddy," he murmured. Charlie didn't respond, but for the first time, he didn't turn away. The next morning, Ethan awoke to the soft sound of paws shifting against the floor. Blinking against the early light, he turned his head, and there was Charlie, sitting just inside the doorway. The dog's ears twitched at the movement, his amber eyes watching, wary but present. It was the closest he had been since coming home. Ethan didn't move too fast, didn't speak right away. He just let the moment settle, let Charlie decide what came next. "Morning, bud," he finally said, his voice hushed. He slowly sat up, giving Charlie the space to bolt if he wanted. But the German Shepherd didn't run. Instead, he held Ethan's gaze for just a second longer before shifting away, walking toward the corner of the room where he had spent the night. Ethan let out a quiet breath. It was progress. Small, fragile, but real. Determined to keep moving forward, he spent the day carefully trying to bridge the gap between them. He threw a tennis ball across the yard. Charlie only watched. He knelt down with an open palm, offering a quiet moment of connection. Charlie turned away. Even dinner was eaten cautiously, with the German Shepherd waiting until Ethan was across the room before approaching his bowl. But later that night, just as Ethan was turning off the lights, he felt it, a soft nudge against his hand. Barely there, but enough to make his chest tighten. He didn't speak, didn't move, Charlie had made the first step, and Ethan wasn't going to let him down. The next morning, something was different. Ethan felt it the moment he stepped onto the porch, coffee steaming in his hands. Charlie stood in the yard, his ears perked, his gaze sharper than it had been since the day they reunited. The hesitation was still there, but beneath it, something new flickered. Curiosity. Hope. Ethan set his mug down and reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against something old and worn. Slowly, he pulled out a battered military whistle, the same one he had used in the field. His heart pounded as he brought it to his lips, uncertainty gnawing at the edges of his resolve. This could go one of two ways. Two short bursts, a familiar command. Charlie's head snapped up. His body went rigid. For a long, breathless moment, he didn't move. Then, ever so slightly, his ears twitched. His gaze locked onto Ethan's, something flickering behind those guarded eyes. Recognition. Not full, not complete, but there. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice thick. "Come on, boy." Charlie hesitated. Then, with slow, deliberate steps, he moved forward, stopping just a foot away. Ethan barely breathed. He reached out, keeping his hand steady, his heart slamming against his ribs. And then Charlie leaned in. Just slightly, just enough. The weight of that single moment crashed over Ethan like a wave. His throat tightened. His hands shook. He had spent weeks waiting, hoping, fighting for this. "You remember, don't you?" His voice was barely above a whisper. Charlie didn't answer. He didn't need to, because for the first time in what felt like forever, his tail gave the smallest wag. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They weren't whole yet. They weren't done healing, but they were on their way together. Ethan and Charlie's journey is a powerful reminder that healing takes time, patience, and love. Both carried invisible wounds, painful memories, losses too deep for words. But through perseverance and compassion, they slowly found their way back to each other, proving that even the most broken souls can be mended. In life, we all face moments of loss, heartache, and uncertainty. But if we remain patient and refuse to give up on ourselves or those we love, the walls built by pain and fear will begin to crumble. Love, loyalty, and resilience don't just help us overcome the past. They give us the strength to build a new future together.